Good afternoon and welcome to bookmakers.com TV. I'm Darren Hughes and I am delighted to be joined by boxing journalist extraordinaire David Payne. We're here to cover the third installment of Canelo Alvarez v Gennadiy Golovkin. I think am I pronouncing that right, David? Otherwise known as Triple G or GGG. David, welcome to the show. How are you keeping?
I'm very well. Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation and a great fighting prospect to talk about.
For sure, yeah, and thank you very much for joining us. And look, I suppose we'll kick off by I'll ask you to fill in the viewers about the history of this matchup. This is obviously the third installment of this fight. It's had its fair share of controversy in the past. You know, a split decision draw was widely condemned in fight one, and Canelo obviously then had a majority victory in round two. So if you could just give us a brief overview of the history of the fight, that'd be great.
Okay, well, as you say, this is the trilogy fight. We've had a trilogy fight in recent memory, but they're not that commonplace anymore. It's hard enough these days to get the top guys in once, let alone to second and third time. But Canelo, as he's known, Saul Alvarez, Canelo and Triple G, their rivalry goes back 7-8 years now. First fight 2017, and there was some history before that because it took a long time to get Canelo to agree to that first fight. I think he was waiting for signs of Triple G aging and to make sure he was ready to step into middleweight. And as you say, a very controversial draw. I had Golovkin a very clear winner in the first fight, as did a majority of people. And it caused a lot of hoo-ha, as they say, about the officiating, about what the motivations of some of the scoring may have been. Adelaide Bird put in a card of 118, 110. Which for non-boxing fans means that she thought Canelo won by 10 rounds to 2, and it was very difficult to make a case for him winning 4. So that really added a lot of heat to the rivalry, and it was a good fight. And then within the year, we had the rematch, which was delayed because of a suspension for Canelo for failing a drugs test, which was unfortunate. And the second fight was much closer. Canelo was more aggressive, had more success on the front foot. I rewatched that at the weekend in preparation for the article I've written for bookmakers, expecting perhaps to see what I've not seen live. So expecting perhaps to see Canelo do better on a rewatch than I remembered in my memory. But it was pretty much the same fight I'd remembered, a little closer than the first one, but I still had Triple G winning by 2, maybe 3 rounds. So Canelo got the victory in that fight. Again, slightly less controversially, I guess, because it was closer. But at the time, I think Triple G was 36, and you wondered where he may go from there. At that point, crushed by those 2 blemishes on his record, you wondered whether he would be able to climb the mountain again. There was a desire for a trilogy, but obviously it wasn't as strong because on paper, at least, Canelo had got a draw and a victory. So they both went their different ways. And we arrived back here 4 years later, quite circuitously because of obviously the pandemic that's had an impact on people's activity. And secondly, because Canelo has had a voyage north from middleweight up to light heavyweight via super middleweight, and we're now back making this contest at the new weight of super middleweight. So it's a fascinating fighting prospect. These are 2 guys operating at a very, very exalted level, would have operated and been successful in almost any era that boxing fans would care to mention. So it's a hot ticket, it's a hot watch, and I'd encourage people to sit down and try and take this fight in because it's an exquisite contest between 2 masters of the art.
For sure, yeah, I know it's one of those fights, I suppose, that's even managed to get through to maybe people who wouldn't watch boxing on a weekly or even monthly basis, but I know a lot of people are going to be tuning in for this. And I suppose one question I just want to pick up on what you said there, it's slightly academic maybe, but you said, this rivalry goes back 7 or 8 years, but maybe it took a couple of years of back and forth to get the fight up. How badly do you think that's affected what we've ended up seeing, in the sense that what did we miss out on if they had actually managed to get that fight agreed to, we'll say 2015 or 2016?
I think it was probably wise from Canelo's point of view. He was a younger fighter coming through. So in the sense of what we missed, I think we would have possibly seen a less competitive fight than we saw. I think he was probably right to try and mature into middleweight. He was probably right to try and see Golovkin age a little more. because Golovkin is an incredibly strong middleweight, very precise, a very heavy puncher. It's not a task taken lightly, as one or two of our British fighters have discovered over the years. So he was probably right to make sure he was as ready as he could be. So in sense of what we missed, I don't think we missed anything in that respect. What's unfortunate is that the fights are remembered for the controversy as much as they're remembered for the terrific fights that they were. As I'd say, I don't to repeat the point, but the technical level that these two guys operate with the different styles, the precision, the elusiveness, the feints, the quality, the footwork, these all make for a fantastic fight, both for your casuals, who you mentioned, that don't always tune in to every fight. They will see a terrific fight with plenty of action, but for those of us who spot the nuances of the art as it is, you can see that they're operating at a fantastic level. So there's something there for everyone. So I don't think we lost a lot, but it's a shame that the history books will talk as much about the actual results provided by the judges as they will about the action in the ring, which was terrific stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's always quite frustrating when officiating or referees are as big a talking point as the two gladiators in the middle, isn't that right? I suppose then moving on to the third fight, it's obviously 4 years since these lads have faced off. 2018, I believe, was the second fight of the trilogy. What do you think has changed since the two first fought in 2017 and even their second fight in 2018? You've obviously referred to Golovkin as the older fighter. He's now 40. Are his powers now waning to the point where he's a serious underdog? Is this very much Alvarez's fight to lose? What do you think has changed in the last few years?
I think over the last 4 years, yes, father time plays a part. Coming through Golovkin, from turning pro in about 2005 as a very decorated amateur, he was a busy fighter. So even once he became a champion, he would fight 2-3 times a year. And that is because, although he's a very heavy puncher, his game is built around rhythm and timing and precision. So he's not an all-action clubbing sort of walk forward, throwing loads of bombs. He's very precise in his work, and that needs to be polished, and it needs to be kept lubricated by activity, if you will. And the more, and it's a truism of boxing, once you're into your 30s, your mid-30s, that's ever more true, because aging is a factor, and the less active you are, the more things tend to decline and decay. There are always exceptions, and Golovkin may prove to be one, but I think over the last 4 years, he's now north of 40, and we must always remember that boxing is a young man's game. It's a cliche, but it holds water in the main. And the second thing is his level of activity is lower, much, much lower. And that's not from choice, that's just out of necessity, the right opportunities, the right the dates, opponents, etc. While we've gone through this COVID period, have been harder for him to find, and as a result, we do have the unknown of a 40-year-old who's not had the activity that we would like, fighting one of the best fighters in the world, who's also now fought at a heavier weight. So when they first fought, Canelo was coming up as the lighter man, and Golovkin was seen as the boss in the fight, the stronger man in the fight. And now we might anticipate that that's been leveled off at the very least, and they meet at 168, another 8 pounds north of the middleweight limit that Golovkin's been so successful at. And Canelo has now had success in this division and competed at light heavyweight, which is a further 7 pounds heavier. So I'm anticipating that it may be a little different this time, that Canelo may have a little less respect for Golovkin's power, and I fear that Golovkin may not be what he once was, and that will depreciate his chances and improve Canelo's. We will see. We will see. It's there's a lot of intangibles that we won't really know for sure until we see them start to trade punches.
Absolutely. And look, you kind of alluded to how you see the fight going there. So I'm going to round out the conversation by just asking you for your definitive, how do you see the fight going? Do we see a full 12 rounds like we saw in the last two? Is there an early stoppage? I know, as you said, you've alluded to the various attributes of Golovkin that might have faded over the last, since 2018, since these two fought last. So what's your sort of ultimate view on how this ends up going?
I still think it's going to be an entertaining fight, unless Golovkin has slipped beyond recognition. I think he will have enough to be competitive at the very least. It's just a question of, does his engine last in the same way? Can he fight at the same pace from bell to bell? Can he fight at the same pace over 12 rounds? They're questions that we won't know. I want Golovkin to win because I felt the injustice of the first two fights. I saw them in the same way as most, that he probably deserved the nod in the second one, but definitely deserved the nod in the first one. And it will be a great lasting sense of injustice if he leaves without a win in any of these three fights. So there's almost a yearning for it to go for him, and that can influence how you view a fight, because you want something badly enough that you kind of want to see what you kind of view it how you want it to, you wish it to unfold. But the common sense tells us that the younger, probably fresher fighter, despite the fact he's had lots of fights, Canelo, fresher fighter, he's probably going to have his way in this fight. I think stubbornness, his great chin, etc., will probably get Golovkin to a point, and we will see what happens on the cards, how close judges have it. But there is a small part of me, and I've mentioned this in the article, that there's probably some sense in covering one or two of the later rounds if Canelo's really got on top and Golovkin starts to fade. There's a possibility of something definitive happening in the very late rounds. I don't imagine anything's going to happen really early. I struggle to foresee that. But it's possible for an aging 40-year-old to be running out of steam, and the house fighter that Canelo is, turning on the pressure and there being some sort of intervention. That's not beyond the realms of possibility given the variables in play.
Perfect. Absolutely. So I suppose we've heard from the expert. I think, is it fair to say you think that Golovkin is definitely the underdog going into this? It is Canelo's fight to lose, for want of a better phrase.
It is. And I've already mentioned that I felt that Golovkin's deserved verdicts in previous fights. And I've always had a love of the underdog, and he goes into this fight as the underdog. So I hope he can pull off what will be a major upset at this point in their respective careers. As you say, it's probably Canelo's to lose, and it's hard to foresee him doing that, given that he's younger, that he's the house fighter, etc. But yes, so I think you summarise it quite well. It's probably Canelo's to lose, and Golovkin's got a lot to do to win.
Right. Well, look, there's plenty of food for thought there. David, I want to thank you very, very much for joining us. As David said, you can read his article on bookmakers.com on the website there. He's put in a nice hefty piece on how he sees the fight unfolding for those who prefer the written word. With that, I'm going to leave it here for today. David, thank you very much once again for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon.
My pleasure.